Hello, everyone, and welcome to How Do You Feel Live. I'm Alana Wesley, your host and moderator, and I'm also the founder of Immersive Futures, the thought leadership event and content series. So for those of you who are new to How Do You Feel, this movement is really about inspiring global empathy and bringing audiences around the world together at a time when we've been so physically apart. We think it's really important that we kind of bring like-minded business leaders together, and that's why we've decided to host these talks. We'll be sharing what they've been up to during the pandemic and lockdown, what their businesses have been doing in response. We also think it's really important to study human behavior and psychology, and so we'll be sharing what everyday people around the world have been feeling and having a bit of a discussion and debate about what that means for the future of business and how we can make a positive impact on community as we move forward. So before we get started, I'd just like to say a couple of quick thank yous. First of all, to the production family and also to Virtual Stage from Really Creative Media, who helped produce these talks today, and also to the Simpler team who launched HowDoYouFeel.live. So for all of you, this is an interactive session, so please keep your questions coming throughout. You need to be logged into the YouTube live stream in order to do that. Today's about 45 minutes long, and there'll be 3 sections, which I will guide you through as we get to them. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first guest speaker, who is Damien Kimmelman. Damien is the founder of Doodle. He's also the co-founder of several fintech companies, including Row.co and the Founders Pledge. And then he recently founded Battelle, which is a sleep school for children. Damien's a widely celebrated fintech entrepreneur, so we're really lucky to have him with us today. Welcome to you, Damien, and sorry for my mumble there.
No worries, thank you for having me.
And our next speaker is our resident speaker, Ben Jenkins, who will be joining us every single week. Ben is the founder of Simpler, and he is also the brains behind HowDoYouFeel.live. Ben was a brand strategist and ethnographer and has spent his career studying youth culture and technology and where the two intersect. So welcome to you, Ben.
Hi, Alana, thank you.
Cool. So for the first part of our interview today, we're going to be learning about what Ben and Damien have been doing during the pandemic and what their business has been doing in response. So my first question's for you, Damien. Battelle, your new online sleep school, is quite the departure from anything that you've done in the fintech world before. So I'd love to hear kind of what inspired you to create Battelle in the first place, but also what's it been like launching an online business during a pandemic? How are you feeling about it all?
I couldn't be, sorry, I'm having technical trouble.
The new normal.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay. So it's been crazy. We started Battelle about 2.5 months ago. So I pulled the trigger on Battelle just 2 or 3 weeks before the lockdown. Essentially for everybody, because you probably don't know about Battelle, we do a remote sleep school for children age 4 months to 4 years old. We teach kids and their parents how to go to sleep within 5 minutes in under a week, guaranteed.
Wow, that's quite the claim.
And it's been booming, right? People are stuck at home without any extra help. They have to be on work calls like this. At the same time, they're supposed to put their babies or children to naps in the middle of the day while they're supposed to be on Zooms. And people have been far, far closer to a problem that was already the #1 problem for any parents with newborns, and it's been quite dramatic because every single parent that we teach, goes through this sort of series of emotions, and to see people from being in utter despair, some literally on the brink of divorce, to crying and with happiness, is pretty dramatic. I wouldn't have changed my career so dramatically if I didn't think it was such a big problem to solve. It's one of these non-obvious sort of problems that has a profound impact on society.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Damien. Ben, the next question's for you. So on Simpla's website, you refer to what you do as creating empathetic technology, which enables organizations to get to the heart of how people really feel at scale. So this must be a pretty fascinating time for your business right now. So I'd love to hear what you've been learning.
Yeah, absolutely. So really what that's getting at, and we'll talk a little bit more of that in the next session, is that we're kind of trying to understand the world more qualitatively. So we've actually seen sort of at a top line, a very different client and a very different consumer. So from a client perspective, people are coming to us from all kinds of categories that just don't know how to ask questions about the future at the moment. So we've got people from airline industry, we've got people from health and wellness, you know, a number of hospitals and healthcare practices are talking to us. They go, we can see the stats, we can see that there's a 40% decline in numbers, but we have no clue about what that means because we've got no models that can predict why any of that is happening. It could be all number of things. So while you can look at the statistics, you can't look at the future using what those are. So people are coming to us basically going, help us understand the why. And then from a consumer perspective, a respondent perspective, we are really noticing a difference in the way people are answering questions. So there's a real openness to talk about feelings. It almost feels like there's a sort of dearth of talking to people in any forum face-to-face, so they're kind of much more comfortable with sharing a more vulnerable self ordinarily. And I think finally we're noticing a different tone in the way brands are talking to each other, talking to consumers. There's still some bad apples, but I think generally there's this sense that the world got a bit closer, strangely enough, because we're all going through something that's quite similar.
That's great. Thank you, Ben. Damien, so I'd like to hear a bit about what the Founders Pledge have been doing, because they've launched this Global Impact and Innovation Fund in response to COVID. And I know that the work that you do there is really to help the startup ecosystem. So, you know, we're hearing all about a global recession on the horizon. You know, what's your advice to would-be entrepreneurs and startup communities? And is this actually a good time to be starting something new? And, you know, I'd really like to hear kind of what your advice is to these people.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. One, just for clarity, what Founders Pledge is, we try with over the last 4 to 5 years, we've raised $2.5 billion in pledges, $2.5 billion worth of pledges. We've fulfilled about $440 million worth of pledges into donations. And we try to focus largely on effective altruism organizations or organizations that deal in existential threats. So a lot of the work that we've done is really on things like pandemics or, you know, the ethics of robotics or, you know, asteroid detection. And we try and educate founders on how to give more thoughtfully to charity. And so that's one thing. And this has been an amazing experience and like horrible experience in so many ways for so many people, but it's really been an amazing experience in all of the ways that Ben's talked about. I think that there's been an incredible, from my own perspective, coming together. And, you know, we've completely changed the ways that we've been working, which is really exciting. On the point of like, whether this is a good time to build a business, it's always a good time to build a business depending on what the business is. But typically, great businesses, really transformative businesses get built in these kinds of times, largely because there's such a change in the way things are being done that it opens up space for new entrants and new for people to create brand new business models. Right? Our business, Battelle, we don't have any office. We're completely distributed across 3 different continents, from day one, that's pretty cool. Like there were tons of businesses before like that, but there are like a quantum difference in the number of distributed businesses now.
Ben, I see you nodding your head avidly. Would you like to share any comments on that before we move on?
No, I'm just agreeing.
Love it. I think it is, there's a lot of talk about, with a lot of people have more downtime to think about things than they ever did. And others of us are absolutely ridden with non-stop business requests. So I think, for those of you out there who are kind of considering starting something new, you heard it from Damien first. Now is a good time if you've got the right idea. So I'd like to now move to our audience questions and invite Harry from the team at Simpler to join us and share a question, please.
Hi, thanks, Alana. Yeah, I think this is a question for both of you. You've both talked a lot about what it's like to run a business, during this pandemic. But I think the question is, how have the last 2 or 3 months changed your longer term outlook?
Ben, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's just come up in the last, when this all started, it definitely felt like there was intellectually a need for more questions to be asked. So therefore more need for a company that does research. What has emerged in really the last few weeks is just how massive that has become. Because where we started, all of the news was talking about key industries, travel, hospitality, and certain things, anything that was physical that you couldn't do anymore. And then it started to transpire that it's everything. Cities are going to be affected. Entire ecosystems on which everything else is built has been affected. So if cities are decentralized, then everything else is going to be affected. Everything that happens in a city, other things, fear around health. People not going to the doctors as much, and what does that do for the drug industry? So long term for me, I feel like the industry that is about asking questions about now and about the future is going to transform completely. Models, benchmarks, and the way that we ask questions is going to be dramatically, at a very philosophical level, completely transformed. The types of questions going to be asked are going to be different. And in every industry, we won't be able to get away now without looking, without asking new questions about how we have to start again in so many different ways.
Thank you, Ben. Damien, would you like to share any thoughts as well?
Yeah, in a very abstract way, and sort of to Ben's point, I think that there's going to be, at least from like a data perspective, there's going to be sort of a bifurcation where people are going to naturally seek more qualitative insights. And I think that that's hugely valuable. They're also going to seek to build much, much more complex models and simulations. Right now, most modeling, whether it be the economy, is very mechanical. And it's ridiculously useless. And that has a profound impact on everything from people's credit scores, to how do you, really quantify GDP, right? All of these things. How do you allocate assets for the government? And you're going to start to see, I think, many businesses and many governments start to move towards sort of simulations, very, very complex simulations of the economy. And ultimately, I think that that's really good. And there's a very important place for qualitative information, and there's a very important place for like these simulations. And you can't look at them sort of in isolation from one another.
Yeah.
Totally.
Like,
I think we all feel that, don't we? And I think on that note, that segues us perfectly into our next section. And thank you for the question to our audience that asked it. It was a great one. We're now going to hear about what everyday people around the world are feeling and kind of what those kind of tell us as we move to the future and how we can use that anecdotal information. So Ben, I know you've prepared a few highlights and some videos, but before you go into that, could you actually explain to everybody what How Do You Feel Live is and kind of what inspired you and the team at Simpler to launch it in the first place and why you think it's important? And for everyone that's watching, in a couple of minutes, a video of How Do You Feel Live will play in the background so you can get a feel for it for yourselves. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, so thank you. So in the last couple of years before coronavirus, we'd been on a mission to sort of go deeper into a more qualitative, empathetic, as we talk about, and almost sort of human way of looking at research. And absolutely agree that qual and quant, a more statistic-based and a more visceral, humanistic approach are necessary, and they've always worked together. But in the last few years, there's been an undue focus on the numbers. And the problem with numbers is that you lose a lot of humanity in that. So our approach, but numbers are much cheaper to scale. It's much easier when you're working with statistics to put everything in boxes and scale it up and do it in a short amount of time. What we have done in the last couple of years is we've focused on a new technology that really wasn't around 5-6 years ago, which is messaging apps. We're now spending most of our time, most of our days communicating very personally, one-on-one through messaging apps. Therefore, it's a great environment for research. It's a great environment to have conversations that just feel much more kind of intimate and personal. But we've added to that chatbots. And chatbots, while they have bad press in other spaces, I think we would argue are brilliant therapists. They are great at getting to people's kind of like core desires. They're like a good interviewer in a way. They're better than sort of bad interviewers. So when the coronavirus hit, we decided, and what you're seeing in the back is How Do You Feel? We decided to launch How Do You Feel because we started to feel sort of distant from people. Not only did we lose direction about what's going on in the future, but what are strangers doing? What are the people on the bus? What are the people in the office space that I work in doing? And you lose that sense of direction, but also connection beyond just your bubble. So How Do You Feel Live was launched in order to kind of like get out of our bubble and see what feelings and what real people are doing across the world. So a lot of these are kind of stories, they're video diaries, they're anecdotes, but when you put them together with kind of what we've got is a global map of kind of sentiments and feelings. And so that was what that was all about. And so I was going to share a couple of thoughts that we've learned from it.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, it would be great to hear a couple of key highlights that you've picked up on this week. And everybody each week, Ben will share new highlights and insights.
So a couple of my favorites from this week were kind of deliberately kind of contradictory. So we've heard a lot about these two sides of one is that technology, and we even talked about it, sort of the increased digitization. Technology is suddenly being supercharged. People who had never jumped on a Zoom, grandma's on Zoom now. People who've never been on Zoom are now on it. People are using types of technology, telemedicine that they've never used before. And that's going to continue throughout, and which is absolutely very likely. At the same time, we're also seeing this sort of back to basics. We're seeing this sort of going back to growing your own veg and cooking your own food and things that, and talking to your extended family, talking to grandma that you'd never done before. What we've noticed in a lot of the conversations that we've been having is that people are using one to help the other. So, these great quotes about, I had never used Zoom before. I was just too frightened. Now I'm having 3-hour conversations with family members I haven't spoken to for a decade. Or this is great quote here about, we used a mixer 3 times in 2 days, and it's been sitting, even though it's been sitting in storage for several years. I usually just mix with a fork. I learned that cake, deviled eggs, and brownies taste very different with a mixer. We're finally dusting off our Instapot air fryer that we were given for Christmas 2 years ago. We pulled out the magic bullet to make morning smoothies every day. So things that people are doing to go backwards are being enhanced by technologies that are associated with going forwards, which I just found a really interesting, kind of more unusual nugget. The second is another sort of potential contradiction. So millennials, the scourge of being able to do anything well themselves, seem to have picked up a new joy for doing stuff that really, the last time we saw it, it was really being done by the greatest generation. That's the generation who are older, who were born before 1945. So stitching old clothes back together, making things, making masks has been a big story. Making your own food, baking your own bread, growing your own food, and even, you know, saving money. And it feels like saving money has been, for a long time, especially in America, saving money has almost sort of been the devil's work, because it doesn't drive the economy. And so we've been discouraged from doing it. And there's some really, and of all people, really the millennials were not the ones that had really been trained to do it, because even their parent boomers weren't doing it. But I've got this great quote about a very creative way of saving loo paper. This is the quote. I'm being very mindful of how many sheets of toilet paper I use, and I've definitely noticed the roll lasting longer. I couldn't get my usual brand. The only thing left was 4-ply. 4-ply sheets are very luxurious, and I love it, but I've been pulling the sheets apart to make 2-ply with double the length, turning 3 sheets of 4-ply into 6 sheets of 2-ply. So people are kind of getting really into these different ways of kind of like being not themselves, picking up new habits. And the final one that I want to share today is this sense of communal responsibility. So another flip, really, because especially in Western cultures where individualism is sacred, this idea of words that include the word communal or social typically kind of stayed away from. But even in the UK, where there's this one guy who's talking about the last thing he wanted to do was go and clap on his doorstep where his neighbors would see him, because he's not really very sociable. But the minute he pushed himself to do it, he noticed sort of new things opening up for him. And another thing is like a sort of like return to sort of post-World War II values. There's this one great quote here from someone in the UK: "The future could be amazing. We could see a global aha moment where we realize that we're interconnected after all, and that we can take collective action and save the planet like ground planes and industries once in a while. My fervent wish is, like the aftermath of World War II, where so much was sacrificed by so many, we can have a global New Deal where the most venal aspects of capitalism are tempered by a new Green Deal of Keynesian economics." And this is one where I want to show a video from a lady just outside of London, who I think kind of like nicely sums up one of those sentiments as well.
Right. So I live on Canvey Island, which is about an hour outside of London, and we have a really, really close-knit community. People joke about it being an island, which is why it's so close. But since this pandemic started, I've never seen people be as community spirited as they are now. People are leaving boxes outside their house with printouts for children to do. Every window has a rainbow in it. There's signs out thanking the bin men. On the local community pages, there's people offering to cook meals for people they've never met and deliver them. People just have to ask for some shopping, and everyone jumps in to try and help. It's absolutely beautiful. And I think having that kind of community is what sets our town apart from so many others. And I think that's what's going to help us get through this pandemic in one piece.
Lovely, and I think I can definitely relate, Ben, to the trend about in the UK feeling a little bit out of my comfort zone, clapping for the NHS, and kind of what that was like afterwards. It was a kind of an out of character experience for us culturally, but it really, really felt amazing, like feeling that we were part of the community. And a lot of my friends messaged me after the first time we did it, so that really rings true for me. So I really recommend that everybody goes on howdoyoufeel.live and share how you're feeling and see how other people are feeling and share it with your networks. So Damien, that was a plethora of insights and information. Do any of them kind of ring true for the things that you've been learning, or indeed, is there another trend that you kind of observed that you think is quite important as we move forward out of the pandemic?
Am I on mute? No, I'm not. I think that there are almost so many trends. I think the thing that I keep on finding astonishing is for every trend there's a counter trend. It's been such a transformational period over the course of so many, never before have so many lives been impacted ever, ever in the history of humanity. Never before have so many lives been impacted at the same time. And so for every trend, there's a counter trend. I feel like I'm living in a simulation because I read an article that, in The Economist, that smokers aren't dramatically adversely affected by COVID-19. Like, something is really messed up in this situation. I personally have, had an amazing experience over the last few weeks, largely because so many of my, it's said that it takes 3 weeks for, your average adult to change their habits. Well, you have billions of people changing their habits over the course of several months. And that to me is pretty dramatic. So any of these things that are quite obvious, right? Like, like the mass digitization of the workplace, right? Like everybody has gone through a massive digital transformation. Yes, but that has second order, third order consequences that are really quite profound and different. They will restructure how we work, how we live. Some of the more personal stories. I realized I'm a fucking introvert. Sorry to curse, but like, I didn't know that I was an introvert. I've realized, that how much work I can achieve in the course of the day.
Thank you for that, Damien. I think we can all relate to quite a few of those things. I'm quite the extrovert, and I've actually discovered the beauty of being an introvert myself and really taken a lot of joy in that. So before we move to the final part of today's interview, where we're going to look to the future and talk about a few predictions, I'd like to invite Harry back to share another audience question, please, with our guests. Hey,
yes, so this is a question that's recurring a couple of times. Both of you were talking about the big behavioral changes that people are making. But we've seen people make big behavioral changes under periods of extreme stress before, right? I think World War II is a great example. So the question is, how do both of you see these do you see these changes sort of taking hold on a longer term basis, or what are the implications of these, the changes under the couple months of isolation as we move out into the world?
Anything? Yeah. Sorry. Shall I go, or do you want to go?
Yes, please, Damien.
Like any technology that's truly disruptive, there are both positive and negative consequences. But I certainly believe that there will be long-lasting changes, largely because people, once they get a shock to the system, it takes a long time for them to adjust, right? This is a new normal. We spent 20 years, in fear, not me, but 20 years in fear of terrorism, right? After 3,000 people were, killed in the World Trade Center. I think that this is far more dramatic in terms of people's habits than that. I mean, it's far wider reaching implications. Both positive and negative.
Ben, would you like to share anything?
Yeah, no, I completely agree that there's no way that this can't have longer lasting effects. I think there'll be some things that people bounce back from. I think people are hoping to bounce back from. But there's other things that, structurally and infrastructure wise, they won't be able to bounce back from. I'm getting a bit of feedback now as well. Because the things have changed, beyond repair. And I think the things I was talking about with cities and infrastructure and technology in the workplace, my kind of like older family members, I don't think are going to go back on not using technology to communicate now, which I think is a good thing. But there's some more emotional stuff that I'm noticing as well that I think, since 1979, there's a study showing that empathy in people had been going down. And in the last few years since social media, it'd been declining even further. I'm seeing that word coming out in news reports and from the lips of people you would never expected, like George W. Bush using that word in a speech that you would never have expected it. So I feel like people's need for emotional proximity and understanding other people, I think, is really going to grow out of this. And I think because that's not something that isn't good for us, I think that's another thing at a sort of emotional structural level will, I think, continue in a really big way beyond this. So maybe that's the optimist in me. But so I think there's going to be physical structures and emotional structures that are going to be for good.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you for that question from our audience. So we're going to move to the final part of today's session where we're going to talk about the future. And Damien, my first question's for you. So the pandemic will continue to have a significant impact on our global economy and in the UK in particular. We're not just focusing on the UK today, but for us, we've got Brexit still to navigate as well. What should the leaders of organisations prioritise and prepare for in order to positively drive changes to come and remain relevant in this kind of new economic environment?
Look, I'll try and answer this quickly, but in a roundabout way. Excuse me. So, look, I was very against Brexit, like I'm sure a lot of people in the audience were. But it's very hard to discount that some of the effects of Brexit actually had a positive effect on ways that we have been dealing with the pandemic. And what I can say is that for the last 30, 40 years, we've been focused as society at optimizing supply chains, optimizing optimization to the extent. And when you think about optimization, it comes at the cost of resiliency. And so what's the future hold? Dramatic resiliency, right? What are some of the consequences of resiliency? As Ben said, savings, stockpiling, whatever, using 2 sheets or 4 sheets of toilet paper, whatever it may be. The point is like, it's actually, in a lot of ways to the detriment of the likes of China, when we've been optimizing these supply chains so much that we had such a heavy reliance on so few countries. I see a lot of made in the UK, made in the USA coming back for a number of reasons, not just because of people's fear.
Great, thank you for that. A very well-rounded answer to quite a big question there. Ben, I'll try not to make you so nasty. Here's one for you. So returning to work is the next big frontier for our society. And as a business leader yourself, what's your advice for leaders of organizations and fellow founders who need to inspire their teams in these uncertain times?
Yeah, another pretty broad one. But all I could talk about is what this has taught us from in the last 11 weeks. So when we started this, I suppose our biggest fear was jobs, and a very instant and kind of like innate fear that you want to protect yourself. And the hardest thing was to not suddenly sort of like pitch for business and also keep everyone occupied. So actually, I would say at least 50% of the reason why we launched How Do You Feel wasn't just for the outside world, it was for us to give us something to do. And I think, every kind of self-help guru talks about, have purpose and do something that, connects you to other people. And so I've certainly noticed, our team has actually grown during the pandemic. And the hardest thing was, and some of these people have never worked with this physically yet. And so the hardest thing was not kind of coming into work and having those sort of like chats when you first get in the morning. So a big thing for us was having a purposeful thing to work on, and that's really galvanized us. So not everyone else can do that, but I've certainly found that having a mission-based project that which we've been very fortunate enough to do ourselves has really kind of like galvanized us and provided a lot more inspiration and kind of like energy for all of us.
Brilliant, love that. So I think we've got time for one more question for you both, which is, and you've covered a few of these, but maybe something new. Kind of what lesson has COVID personally taught you so far in this lockdown period that you kind of intend to take forward in your personal life or in business? Maybe Damien, you can start.
Can I think about that a little bit more?
Go on then, Ben.
I personally, and I think I heard this in one of Damien's answers as well, I'm surprised by how little I miss. So this sort of reminds me more of like what it was like living in the English countryside in, when I was 15. And I've sort of just slotted back into that, where you just have to find stuff to do. And weirdly, because I probably didn't have loads of like outside stimulus in those days, I just slotted right back into that. So I've actually found quite a lot of other things to do, and it's a reminder of what Damien said about it takes three weeks to completely change. The thing I've noticed personally, and from the hundreds of people we've been speaking to around the world, and how do you feel, is that we're just really adaptable. We have got used to, while there was fear in the first few days, and there's still in pockets of the world, more than just pockets, there's people going through some really bad stuff right now. Wherever we are, we're adapting. And I think, my favorite person to listen to every day is Cuomo, the governor of New York, because he just talks about, let's not waste this opportunity, which has been really dramatic and pretty awful for a lot of people, but let's not waste this opportunity to come out of it radically different. He talked about Hurricane Sandy and 9/11 a lot. And he was like, the amount of growth that we had after that and things that changed in terms of like how we did business, downtown Manhattan changed massively, the regeneration after Hurricane Sandy. And he's saying, telemedicine and the ways that we do business have to radically change. And I think, for me, that's what I think is going to come out of this as well. We're going to be different. We have adapted. And I think moving forward, we'll continue to.
Great. Damien, would you like to share a final comment?
I've been working on my memory.
Cool.
And I've been being tutored by a world champion in memory competitions.
Nice.
So I've been trying to learn the first 100 and 1,000 digits of pi, learn how to memorize a deck of cards.
How far are you into those digits?
What else do you do? It's an amazing thing. If anybody wants to buy a book, I'll give a shout out to him. Dominic O'Brien, unbelievable. He's 8-time world champion of memory competitions.
Is that the Memory Palace? Is that what he works with?
Yeah, exactly. And he can memorize 52 decks of cards, not 52 cards, 52 decks of cards in like a couple hours.
Right. So if you're looking for something to do during the pandemic, everyone, there's your answer. If you're out of ideas, I'm going to wrap up now because we're nearly out of time. Damien, Ben, thank you so much for sharing all your ideas and thoughts. It's been great having you.
Thank you.
Great. See you later. And everybody, thank you so much for joining us today and for all your brilliant questions. I think being the Bolshy Brits that we are, we had a cheeky swear word somewhere in there, so sorry about that if anyone's offended. Next week, you can tune in at 4 o'clock on Thursday, UK time, where we will have the director of Facebook Planning joining us, Ian Edwards, for another session. So all that's left for me to say is check out howdoyoufeel.live. I hope you enjoyed today. Thank you again to the production family, to Virtual Stage and the team at Simpler. See you soon and stay safe.